So this morning our speaker is Marlize Muller, who is a PhD student with SAEON. Marlize comes to us today from Northwest University in Potchefstroom, and where she's been working on her PhD since 2019. She did a master's in urban ecology there before, and then for her PhD she's been working at a SAEON site in Heinsberg. That's a site that we set up over 10 years ago after we identified it as a good place to study impacts of climate change and other things on a very species-rich grassland ecosystem. So Marlize has made use of some of the long-term data there as well as some of her own, and she's going to tell us this morning about how that system has responded to the recent drought. All right, so just a reminder to put questions into the chat as Marlize is talking if you wish, or you can hold them and ask them yourself at the end of the talk. All right, I'll hand over to you, Marlize.
Thank you very much, Tony. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about my research. So for my PhD, I'm doing it on the effects of climate variability, land use change and management, on grassland plant diversity and ecosystem function in South Africa. Today, I will be addressing a part of my PhD research, which is on the drought effects on a floristic diversity in the threatened Woodbush Granite Grassland of South Africa. It has long been thought that forests are the dominant climate systems on Earth, while non-forested open ecosystems, such as deserts, tundra, grasslands, and savannas, are successional stages leading up to the climatic state. But this notion has been challenged by the fact that more than 58% of the planet's land area is covered by non-forested open ecosystems. Despite this, the threats faced by forests are well understood, documented, and resourced, while open ecosystems, which includes grasslands, are far less resourced and understood. So what do we know about grasslands? We know that grasslands are hyperdiverse ecosystems hosting an exceptionally high diversity of animal and plant species, habitats, and communities. These diverse grasslands evolved in the presence of endogenous disturbances such as lightning-ignited fires, rainfall variability, and large mammalian herbivory. These endogenous disturbances are naturally occurring and do not disrupt the soil surface. For this reason, the grassland ecosystems are tolerant and to some extent dependent on these natural disturbances. In contrast, exogenous disturbances are associated with soil destruction and include activities such as afforestation, agriculture, and urbanization. These exogenous disturbances remove above and below ground plant biomass, thus reducing potential of perennial grassland plants to persist through resprouting, placing grasslands under threat. Mainly due to these exogenous disturbances, the grassland biome of South Africa is one of the most threatened biomes. With 40 to 60% irreversibly modified, 60% of the remaining grassland is threatened, and only about 15% remains natural, and of that, only about 3% is formally protected. Although it is well accepted that land use change threatens grassland floristic diversity, it has not yet been quantified for different land use types. This part of my study was done by sampling throughout the grassland biome to get a broad understanding of the effects of land use change on grassland diversity. Furthermore, it's known that drought may increase in the near future and that fire policy change may impact grasslands, but the effect of the increased droughts and fire policy changes on diversity, richness, and endemic species is not yet fully known. These effects will be determined for the threatened Woodbush Granite Grassland, and today I will only be focusing on the drought effect. For the question, how does land use change influence floristic diversity, my results have recently been published. In this study, I determined the effect of land use change on floristic diversity of the grassland biome. Floristic sampling was done at 18 sites throughout the grassland biome, and a few sites in the Indian Ocean coastal belt biome in which some grasslands occur. Two dominant land use types were included in this study, namely agriculture and urbanization. In the agricultural land use type, surveys included field margins, old and abandoned fields, and afforestation. Afforestation as land use was represented by commercial plantations and grouped under agriculture due to small sample size. The urban land use type included urban open space, peri-urban areas, and rehabilitated mine tailings. Even though there were different land uses sampled, all data was lumped and considered as transformed and untransformed only. Some key results from this paper. As was expected, the floristic results indicated the total number of species, number of endemic species, and a number of threatened species are higher in untransformed grasslands, which is supported by the diversity measures, which are all higher for untransformed grasslands than transformed grasslands, which can be seen in Table 2. The transformed grasslands had more naturalized and invasive species, which is also to be expected. It was found that some plant families remain in the system even after being disturbed, including Asteraceae, Poaceae, Herbaceous, and Siebert. Naturalized and invasive species mainly came from families that are typically pre-adapted to disturbed environments. In contrast, certain families, such as the geophytic Hyacinthaceae and the Eridaceae, were extensively disadvantaged by habitat transformation as they are sensitive to soil disturbance because their bud banks are generally below ground. So this study set out to assess species loss due to transformation, and based on the current data set, it can be conclusively stated that grasslands are severely impacted in terms of species richness and diversity. These changes are of concern as grasslands have a high economic value and support the well-being of humans by providing, among others, ecological infrastructure, carbon sinks, plant-based medicines, and food. Further studies are needed to determine whether these floristic shifts can still maintain and provide ecosystem services that are expected from grasslands in South Africa. Drought, which is part of rainfall variability, is a natural occurring phenomenon characterized by changes in precipitation, increased temperatures, soil moisture, and others. It is expected that drought events will become more frequent in years to come, with associated warmer temperatures and a decline in annual rainfall. From 2014 to 2016, most parts of South Africa experienced a severe drought during the rainy season. This drought event provided an opportunity to study the effects of drought on grassland floristics. Studying the impact of drought on grasslands has gained urgency, as there is a need to understand how droughts will impact the sustainable management of grasslands now and in the future. Therefore, an improved understanding of the floristic and functional diversity is necessary to understand the community and functional shifts related to climate change. This study aimed to investigate the effects of climate variability on plant diversity of the fragmented, pristine mist belt grasslands of the Woodbush Granite Grassland at Hennedsberg in South Africa. The objective of the study was to assess floristic changes related to rainfall variability in the Woodbush Granite Grassland through the application of the Temporal Beta-diversity Index. So the study area was at Hennedsberg, where SAEON has established 93 permanent plots. The Woodbush Granite Grassland is a diverse but threatened grassland type in South Africa. It occurs around Hennedsberg, within the Messick Highveld grassland bioregion of the grassland biome, and forms part of the Volkberg Center of Endemism. This grassland type is listed as critically endangered, since only about 6% is still in a natural state. The largest remaining fragment of the Woodbush Granite Grassland is only 192 hectares, which is surrounded by multiple land use types, especially plantations. The Woodbush Granite Grassland furthermore borders the sour bushveld vegetation of the savanna biome to the east, which is anticipated to expand and encroach into the Woodbush Granite Grassland as a result of climate change. Since the Woodbush Granite Grassland is critically threatened and the remaining fragments very small, the conservation value of this area is very high. SAEON has established 93 permanent plots consisting of annually burnt plots, triennially burnt plots, and peninsula plots as seen in this map. Peninsula plots are located on a small remnant of protected Woodbush Granite Grassland and does not have any burn programs. For this presentation, I will only focus on the 40 permanent annually burnt vegetation monitoring plots. The natural fire return interval for the Woodbush Granite Grassland is about 3 years. Therefore, the part of the grassland that was annually burnt already experienced some stress regardless of the drought. For this reason, it is expected that the most extreme impact of the drought would be seen in this annual burn plots. The sampling and data collection conforms to the SAEON sampling protocol for long-term grassland monitoring. Sampling was done in February at time of peak standing crop in the years 2009, which represented pre-drought conditions, 2015, which represented drought year, and 2019, which represented the post-drought conditions. When looking at the rainfall that was obtained in Hindenburg, 166 years of rainfall data was collected. The green line represents the average rainfall for the Woodbush Granite Grassland as obtained from literature, while the yellow line represents the average rainfall measured at Hindenburg and calculated with the available data. From this graph, it can be seen that the rainfall for 2015 is the lowest in this time and well below average. Rainfall in 2009 was also below average but increasing, while the rainfall in 2019 was above average. So the results that we obtained. In the annual burn plots, a total of 261 species were recorded, which is very species rich. This includes 45 grass species, 173 forb species, and 43 long-lived forb and woody or shrub species. Of these species, 14 were South African endemics, of which 3 were endemic specifically to the Woodbush Granite Grassland. The same 3 endemic species were also endangered, and another species was near threatened. The most prominent families that were seen were the Asteraceae, Herbaceous, and Herbaceous, which is a similar result as was obtained from the larger grassland study. These results represent the drought data. The results from the NMDS revealed separate clusters for the years before the drought, during the drought, and after the drought. These clusters were verified by Permanova, which indicated a significant difference in floristic composition between the years. These species represent the grass species that contributed most to this change as seen in this graph. These species include 2 increased grass species with low grazing value, Semipogon and Laetitia, and 2 decreased species with high grazing value, Disturbances and Themeda. Themeda triandra seems to have benefited some from the drought, possibly due to less competition from other grass species. Setaria showed a decrease from pre-drought to post-drought conditions, while both Laetitia and Semipogon had very little to no change from before the drought up until the drought event. These species represent 4 species that contributed most to the separate clustering of the different years. The 4 species that contributed to these changes are all perennial species that were perhaps outcompeted by other species once the rainfall started to increase. With the diversity measures, it was found that for all 3 of the diversity measures, there was a peak in 2015, with the diversity measures before the drought and after the drought being very similar. This indicates that the system benefited somewhat from the drought and returned to diversity that was seen before the drought. Because there was an increase in diversity with drought, we asked the question of which species were the winners and which were the losers in this case. Therefore, we implemented the Temporal Beta-diversity Index. The results of the TBI index are these BC plots. B represents the species losses on the x-axis, and C represents the species gains on the y-axis. The green line with a slope of 1 goes through the origin and represents theoretical positions of sites where the gain would be equal to the loss. The red line, which is parallel to the green line, passes through the centroid of all points. When the red line is below the green line, it indicates the species loss dominated across all sites, with the opposite being true if the red line is above. Furthermore, points found toward the upper right corner represent higher temporal beta diversity than points found toward the lower left corner. Each plot is represented by either a circle or a square. Circles represent plots where losses dominated, while squares represent plots where gains dominated. There are also two BC plot result options, namely species occurrence and species abundance. According to Legendre, who created this TBI analysis, aerial cover can be treated as species abundance in the TBI test, and species occurrence can refer to the presence or absence of species. These results represent the presence and absence recorded in the annual burn plots. This includes all herbaceous species. In terms of species occurrence from the drought before the drought to the drought year, there was an overall significant gain of species. From the drought year to after the drought, there was an overall significant loss of species. And then the overall effect from before the drought to after the drought was an overall non-significant gain of species. This means that the system was not severely impacted by the drought in terms of the species occurrence. In terms of species abundance or cover, from before the drought to the drought year, there was a significant gain of species abundance. From the drought to post-drought, there was an overall significant loss of species abundance. Then the overall effect from before the drought to after the drought was one of overall significant loss of species abundance, meaning that the drought impacted the cover of species, which has not yet recovered to their pre-drought conditions. When only looking at grass occurrence, there was a significant gain in grass species from before the drought to the drought year, and then a significant loss in grass species from the drought year to after the drought. The overall effect of drought on grass species is, however, non-significant. When only looking at grass abundance or cover, there's a similar trend as that of grass occurrence. From before the drought to the drought year, there was overall significant gain in grass abundance. Then from the drought to the post-drought, there was a significant loss in grass abundance. The overall effect of drought on grass species abundance was, however, significant for abundance of grass species. This means that in terms of occurrence and abundance, grass species were negatively impacted by the drought. Forbs are non-grass herbaceous plants and make up a big portion of grassland diversity. Therefore, it is important to understand what happens to forbs during the drought event. Forbs in the grassland ecosystem benefited from the drought in terms of species occurrence, as there was an overall significant gain in forb species, but not for the cover. From the pre-drought to the drought year, there was an increase in the abundance of 33 species, with a decrease of 12 species. From the drought to the post-drought year, there was only an increase in the abundance of 8 species, while there was a decrease in abundance of 25 species. And then the overall effect was a significant loss of forb cover. From preliminary analyses, it would appear that more shrub-like herds or forbs were lost from the system due to this drought. The long-lived forb and woody species for absence and occurrence are represented in this table. See, for abundance, there were more decreases in abundance than increases for all the years, while occurrence was increased from before the drought to the drought year and then decreased to 21 species after the drought. It would therefore appear that the drought event had somewhat a negative effect on the abundance and occurrence of these long-lived forbs and woody species. The drought event had an impact on the beta diversity of the Woodbush Granite Grassland, which is evidenced by the species turnover seen in the TBI analysis. This suggests that the Woodbush Granite Grassland could tolerate drought, as it was not as severely affected as was expected. This could indicate possible resilience to drought. The drought event of 2015-2016 was severe, especially in the agricultural sector. However, it was a relatively short drought, and if droughts are prolonged as is expected in the near future, we do not know what the effect would be on the grasslands. We know that there were species losses and gains, but it was dynamic. The gains and losses of species seem to compensate each other, as the mean number of species was similar for pre- and post-drought conditions. It would therefore be good to know which species and functional groups can survive climate change. When comparing grass and Forb responses, the main difference was that the overall grass occurrence decreased, while the overall Forb occurrence increased. This could be due to the fact that many Forb species are reliant on below-ground storage organs and below-ground buds that enable them to resprout and survive the drought event. It has been observed that the effect of drought alone on grassland had a minimal impact on plant community structure and composition. The combination of drought with other disturbances such as fire and grazing could have a more significant effect on grassland communities, as have been observed for savanna systems. Therefore, later on, I would compare the different fire treatments that were implemented in the Woodbush Granite Grassland. It was also expected that a drought would result in loss of more species, but it appears that the drought impacted the abundance of species more severely. Even though there was a significant loss in abundance of species from before the drought to after the drought, it has been observed for vegetation in southern Africa that it has either remained stable or has increased over time in cover and biomass. It is therefore expected that the abundance of species will recover over time to be similar to that was experienced before the drought. To conclude, this system was under fire stress as well as drought stress. However, it was able to recover from these stresses. This could be due to the high biodiversity of the system, which, according to a growing body of work, supports the idea that biodiversity promotes ecosystem functioning and stability. This knowledge could aid our understanding of the distribution of drought-tolerant plants in order to better predict future responses and resilience to climate change. Also, allow us to determine which functional traits to conserve in a system to allow for the survival of the whole system. This study set out to assess the impact of a severe, multiple-year drought event on floristic diversity in a biodiverse South African grassland. Unexpectedly, the drought event did not have a strong effect on species occurrence throughout sampling time. However, there was a decrease in species cover and slight changes to species composition. Further studies are needed to determine the effect of severe drought on grasses, forbs, and woody species, as only preliminary studies were done. The effect on woody species is especially important, as it is predicted that woody species will increase in grasslands due to the interactions between fire and grazing regimes, rainfall variability, and atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Marlize, for that very interesting talk. Are there any questions? Well, I've got one so long. Marlize, from other studies, maybe from literature review you've done, are there many studies from mesic grasslands and like similar responses to drought?
There was some. I haven't found a lot actually. There were some that expressed the impact of drought on floristic changes, but there weren't very much studies done yet. So yeah, I think this one is quite new in the field.
See, there's a question from Zach. Zach, do you want to say your question? Are you there?
Hello. Just listening to the introduction, Marlize, you mentioned that grasslands are hyper-diverse ecosystems, and it's not coming from a sort of a botany background. I don't know much about this, but that sort of seems to imply that some ecosystems are not very diverse, or that there are degrees of diversity in different ecosystems. Is that are there any ecosystems that are not diverse? So it's not strictly related to your research, but just
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, we found that natural occurring systems, especially grasslands, are very biodiverse. That was part of my first study, was to determine the differences between natural systems and those that have been changed by human interference or impact. And we found that the systems that have been changed and are no longer in their natural state are far less biodiverse than are the natural occurring systems. So generally, natural unaffected grasslands are very biodiverse, and then the changed systems are less.
Okay. Does that also apply to very dry places, such as, I don't know, the Gobi Desert is the driest place I can think of offhand? Would that be still naturally, in its natural state, very diverse?
Yes, I think I don't know that much about desert systems, but there are species that have naturally adapted to the environments that they thrive in. So when that system in the specific climatic area is, it would have diversity, a lot of endemic diversity. And if that system would be disturbed, I would also suspect that it would, the diversity would decrease. So I think when you compare a desert system to a grassland system, the desert system would have less diversity. But yeah, they are just different systems and they've adapted and evolved differently.
Okay, but in this context, very diverse means natural, not human interfered. Thanks very much.
Just to elaborate a bit, Zach, I mean, this site is particularly diverse for an area with this climate and soils. I mean, that number of species, I think Marlize put it up there, it's over 200 species recorded in an area of that size is quite different to most parts of the world. I mean, even natural grasslands don't generally have so many plant species in an area of that size. So that's where the hyper comes in. And yeah, I mean, in natural undisturbed ecosystems, there's a tremendous variety of diversity. So various causes for that. But even if you look along our escarpment at the different grasslands we have, there's quite a big range of diversity, the number of species in a given area along the escarpment. And for various reasons, this particular type of ecosystem just has a lot of species.
Okay, thanks very much.
Anyone else?
Yeah, hi. Can I ask a question, Marlize?
Go ahead.
Okay. Marlize, you mentioned bud banks as being a potential reason for why some of the forbs seem to tolerate or respond positively to the drought. Did you look at annual plants at all in perhaps being a component of the grassland that was perhaps benefiting from the drought?
Thank you for the question. So I have looked at the bud banks, mostly of perennial plants, not very much of annual plants. But interestingly, I did some preliminary analyses on the species that contributed most to the changes throughout the years, from pre-drought to drought to post-drought. And almost all the species that contributed most to these changes were perennial species. Very few annual species. So I still have to delve deeper into that and see why these perennial species are causing the changes, why they're decreasing and increasing, and figure out the trend there. But I'll definitely be using the bud bank data as well to try to figure out what is going on, to understand the system better.
Okay, so just to make a comment there for the benefit of other people. So SAEON and Ndlovu is also involved in a lot of savanna monitoring, and we actually found a different story in the response of the savannas to the drought. The biggest response post-drought in the savannas was the annual component of the vegetation. So that's really a nice sort of contrast between the two different systems and how they perhaps are both resilient to drought, but through different mechanisms. So that's great. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. See, there's a question there from Sue in the chat. Sue, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks so much. Yeah, really wonderful work. And yeah, I just wanted to know, we're doing some long-term plots following up on historic work in the Cathedral Peak area through Paul's work. But we've always had an interest in looking more closely at what you guys are doing and applying the same kind of protocols to Cathedral Peak. And I was wondering, through assessing the data, if you came up with sort of, oh, I wish they had done this, or any recommendations where we can improve that protocol, and is it something you think we can cut and paste as is to Cathedral Peak? Obviously, we've got a lot of catching up to do. You guys have been doing this for a long time. But yeah, any recommendations on the actual protocol on, I wish I had this information to interpret things in a better way. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, I also came in to the SAEON protocol a bit later. I wasn't part of it, developing it. But I think from my own experience, it would have been nice to have additional information on species counts. At the moment, we only have information on the cover, so an estimate of the cover in each plot. So I think if we had actual species counts per area, that would have been nice. And then something else that could have helped us is having biomass readings from a dispersion or something like that to assess how the biomass has changed throughout the years. Yeah, from my side, I think that's all.
Thanks. If I could just make a comment. Sorry, what was the rainfall in this area?
The average rainfall.
Yeah.
Just go back to that slide. It's taking a bit of time.
No, is it? I mean,
it's around. It's just under 1,000, I think.
Music. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
no, it's music.
So one of the things found in previous research is we looked at the biomass of the previous year on the current year biomass, and in the mesic sites, it has quite a big influence. So changes in rainfall, so in your mesic areas, you get that self-shading effect, whereas in the more arid areas, they're very responsive to rainfall sort of whenever it rains. And that kind of accumulation of biomass between fires and things, I think there's something to look at in detail there across the systems and to see how that's changing, because that could also start changing some of the function of systems. So looking at it, your productivity is sort of previous year's biomass over current, or current year's biomass over previous year's biomass to look at that interaction. And it's a very strong interaction in mesic areas and absent in the more arid areas, where rainfall has a bigger impact on productivity in the arid areas, whereas previous year's biomass has a bigger impact in the mesic areas. But how will drought change that dynamic? Just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It'll be very interesting to look at that further.
Okay, thanks, Sue. I see Hayden's had his hand up for a while. Do you want to go ahead, Hayden?
Sure, thanks. So if memory serves, that area, or at least I know around the Barberton area, there are a number of serpentine outcrops that are around there, which are, associated with high levels of nickel and chromium and magnesium and higher calcium ratios. And something from my work that I did a while ago was I found that certain, well, this was just during the research, but was that metallophyte plants, which are adapted to these areas with high metal concentrations in the soils, also have cross tolerance in the form of it allows them to have better drought tolerance. And I was wondering if you have any, do you have any serpentine soils in your study site? Because that would be a really cool thing to see, is to see whether or not the spots where you've got these serpentine soils respond differently to the spots that you don't have serpentine soils. Because what you get are these things called land races, which is where plants that are growing in a specific area, they might be the same species, but they are better adapted to dealing with the high metal concentrations at that particular spot compared to the ones, further down the hill or something like that. And I was just wondering if that was something that you had a look at, or if you'd mapped for your particular study site.
Thank you for the question. That's actually very interesting. I haven't thought about doing that, but luckily we have sampled the soil in the different treatments. So those soil samples have been sent in for analyses, but I haven't yet started looking at it, delving into it deeper. But it would actually be good to have something specific to look for. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. It would definitely be something to look at. Knowing there is a history of the metal content affecting the drought's tolerability. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
It's a very cool study site. So I'm super jealous.
You're welcome to join for the next sampling.
You have to persuade my wife that I could leave her alone.
Okay. Don't see any more hands up. Any other questions? Let me just check the chat. Yeah. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, thanks again to Marlize for giving us this talk today, and good luck with finishing off your PhD. To end off, let me just advertise the next talk, which is going to be in a month's time. That's on the 3rd, Friday the 3rd of September, will be our next seminar. And that's going to be actually on a fairly similar topic, also grasslands and also mesic grasslands. It's going to be Paul Godin, also a PhD student. He's with the grasslands node, and he's going to be talking on socio-ecological legacy effects on grassland transformation in the biodiversity-rich Drakensberg Mountains. So Caitlin will send you the reminder, but please keep that in your diaries. And thanks to everyone for joining today and making the effort to support our science seminar. And have a good long weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marlize.